Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Fernandez. The 2026 primaries in North Carolina have wrapped up, and now we turn to the general election in November. National eyes will be on the Senate race to fill the seat of longtime Republican Thom Tillis. On the Democratic side, you have former Governor Roy Cooper. On the Republican side, you have former RNC Chairman Michael Whatley. Both won their respective nominations on Tuesday. Joining us now to sort through what this means for November and what the next few months will be like is WRAL's Brian Murphy. Brian, thanks for being here.
Yep, thanks for having me.
So, no surprise, these two won their party's nominations. What put Whatley and Cooper over the top? Just name recognition?
Yeah, when Roy Cooper got in the race, he's the two-time governor, still very popular, has never lost an election, been in office for many, many years. Kind of cleared the field. Wiley Nickel got out. No challenger of note really emerged. So there were several challengers, but Cooper kind of cleared the field, and it was pretty obvious that he was going to win. Michael Whatley, on the other hand, had the endorsement of Trump, and obviously we know how far that goes in Republican primaries these days. He was sort of the last man standing, right? There was talk that Laura Trump was going to get in this race, and some other names were floated. Michael Whatley was the one who did it. Now, he didn't exactly clear the field. Michelle Morrow, who was the 2024 Republican nominee for Superintendent of Public Instruction, very nearly won that race. She was a candidate in the Senate race, although she got in pretty late. And then Don Brown, sort of a conservative firebrand, really running against Whatley as an establishment candidate, tried to make some inroads as well. But when you have the endorsement of Donald Trump in today's Republican Party, that goes a long way. Michael Whatley also was the chairman of the Republican Party here in North Carolina, so certainly has deep ties around the state to lots of different people in the Republican Party. I think that carried both of them.
So you mentioned, obviously, the endorsement of President Trump. We know the national importance of this race. We've heard so much about it. Why does it matter so much in the grand scheme of things if you are now just paying attention post-primary?
Yeah, well, the Republicans hold a 53-47 majority in the U.S. Senate right now. And Democrats will have to win 5 seats, right? Because a 50-50 tie still favors the Republicans, given, they hold the White House. So Democrats are going to have to win 5 seats. And when you look at the map, it's hard to find 5 Republican seats that Democrats can flip. Now, certainly North Carolina is one of them, and any path to a Democratic majority in the U.S. Senate involves Roy Cooper winning this race and becoming, turning North Carolina blue. North Carolina gets a reputation as a very purple state. We've elected Democratic governors. Roy Cooper won 2 terms as governor of North Carolina at the same time that Donald Trump was carrying the state in the presidential race. So we've sent a lot of Republican senators. Thom Tillis had 2 terms. Ted Budd, Richard Burr. We've sent a lot of Republicans to the U.S. Senate. So this is a state that Democrats can win statewide. We've seen it at governor. We've seen it at lieutenant governor, even attorney general. But in these federal races, Republicans have won. But the reason it's so important is control of the U.S. Senate is on the line, and any path that the Democrats have runs right through North Carolina. Now, the Republicans have more outs. They have more ways to hold on to that majority. And so maybe it'll mean a little less to them. But, I think North Carolina is going to be one of those battleground states, and you're going to see a lot of advertising. North Carolina is a very expensive state to advertise in. There's really like 10 or 7 different districts that you have to, media markets that you have to buy ads. So it's a very expensive race automatically, just from a television buying standpoint. The one thing that's interesting to me, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit, but the early polling has really favored Roy Cooper in this race. He's leading by about 10 points over Whatley in kind of generic polling that was done before the primary. And so it'll be interesting to see if that race doesn't get tighter if both sides, Republicans and Democrats, decide to spend their money elsewhere.
Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're joined now by WRAL's Brian Murphy talking about the North Carolina Senate race. Now that we know it's going to be Michael Whatley versus Roy Cooper in this setup. So you talked a little bit about just the expensive nature of what it's going to be like to advertise for this race. I mean, we've already seen across the country. I believe Texas set a new record for spending in a primary. Like, this is going to be a very expensive midterm election for the different candidates. Or is that just should be the thought process for the next several months is we're just going to see a lot of political ads. This is going to be very front and center for anyone that has the ability to vote in the state.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen during this primary a lot of ads in the U.S. House race, District 4, the primary between Nida Alam and Valerie Foushee on the on the Democratic side. Seen a lot of ads on the Republican side in the North Carolina 1 race. We've seen a ton of ads in the Phil Berger race. Now that's in Rockingham County and Guilford County, so we haven't necessarily seen those. But, when you get to November, North Carolina doesn't have a lot of competitive congressional races. And what we do have is a giant Senate race. So I expect almost all the spending in North Carolina to be on that Senate race, on Cooper, on Whatley. Get ready to learn everything you thought you wanted to know and didn't want to know about both of these men. And what's amazing is they're, in some ways, very similar. They're both going to tell you they're outsiders to Washington. Roy Cooper has never served in Washington. Michael Whatley's never served in elected office. So they're going to tell you they're outsiders, but these are really two insiders. You don't become chairman of the Republican National Committee, without being an insider, knowing how to play the game. You're not a two-term governor, chairman of the Democratic Governors Caucus or Alliance or Association, without, being an insider. And so, it will be interesting. They're both, relatively close in age. They're both white males. I imagine, we'll see a ton of advertising, but there's not, certainly they come from different political parties, but there's not like a generational difference or a racial difference or an obvious thing that people can latch onto.
So with the advertising in mind, right, we're going to have, I'm trying to do my math here really quick, 8 more months until the general election. So what should you expect to see in the next 8 months? Not necessarily just from a advertising perspective.
Yeah, I think Roy Cooper is going to try to make this race about affordability. He's already starting a tour today. Make things cost less tour. Very good naming on that one. But how much of this race becomes a proxy vote about Donald Trump? The president's approval rating is not high at the moment. In fact, it's near historic lows. We just started a war in Iran, and so the question becomes, what is President Donald Trump's, approval rating when people go to the ballot box in November, and does that help Michael Whatley? Does it hurt Michael Whatley? Does it help Roy Cooper? Does it hurt Roy Cooper? And I think in many ways, these off-year elections become a referendum in some ways on the president. And Michael Whatley's, doesn't have much of a political background of his own. Like he doesn't have
a history.
Yeah, he doesn't have a political narrative of his own that he can sell. In a lot of ways, was Donald Trump's RNC chairman. He was Donald Trump's pick to be in this race. And so I think you're going to hear a lot about, from Roy Cooper's side, trying to tie Michael Whatley to President Donald Trump, especially if his ratings are sinking. The one, drawback to that is Donald Trump is relatively popular in North Carolina. He's carried the state 3 times. Even if his popularity has dipped here in recent months, he still won this state 3 times when he ran for president. So I think Roy Cooper is going to try to pitch himself as a son of North Carolina, a guy who you voted for in the past. You can trust him to go up to the Senate and try to solve problems. He's not going to be a radical left-winger. I think he's going to sell himself as a moderate who can solve problems when he gets to Washington. Michael Whatley may sell himself as Republicans. You voted for Donald Trump, and if you want a Donald Trump presidency, then you better keep a Republican Senate, because if it's a Democratic Senate, then judges are not going to get passed. Nominees are not going to get passed. Donald Trump's agenda is going to be stalled in Washington, D.C., unless Republicans keep the Senate. And so I think that's the shape of the race.
And if there's anything I think we've learned over the past, year and a half or so, 8 months is a long time. And a lot can happen over the course of the next 8 months. But we know that, the NC Capitol team, everyone here at WRAL will be covering this race as it moves forward, not just nationally, but locally as well. That's WRAL's Brian Murphy. Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.